In this video article, I'm going to do something slightly different and share a personal story. And this is how my third novel got rejected by HarperCollins, and the number one catastrophic mistake that I made that hopefully you won't ever make. Before we get into that story, if you want to get an email with a timestamped overview every time I release a new video like this, you go over to my website at deliberate-practice.com, sign up for my email list there. There's other content at the website, plus there's thank you goodies for signing up, and there'll be more of that to come in the weeks and months ahead. Anyway, let's go back to 2003 and the story. So back in 2002, I wrote a serial killer thriller called 10, which was my third novel. The second novel I don't remember because someone will ask. I used to write that on this really weird Windows laptop back in the mid-90s when I was a professional musician. And the first novel I wrote was called The Power of Belief. That was a fantasy novel set in a kind of alternate world that was like a bit of a artifact of medieval France, but with the chivalry taken to the nth degree. Anyhow, in early 2003, my wife and I and our 6-week-old son went for a 4-day break with some friends, and those friends were Nanny Kate, Chris, and their 12-week-old daughter Sophie. Kate was reading one day, I forget what, but it was something vaguely thriller, mystery kind of that kind of genre, and she had 3 or 4 books in that genre as well. And so we got talking about that because at that point in time I was reading quite a lot of that kind of thing. I discovered John Sanford, Jeffrey Deaver, and we were talking about all this, and I asked her if she'd read Silence of the Lambs, which of course she had because she was quite a vociferous reader, and I asked her, have you tried Red Dragon? Because she complained about the first sequel to Silence of the Lambs and she hadn't enjoyed it. And we talked about Red Dragon, and I told her, in my opinion, it was a superior book to Silence of the Lambs, and definitely superior to, I think the first sequel was just called Hannibal. I've read it and I didn't like it, so I don't remember much about it. Anyway, in that conversation, I also let it slip that I'd written my own serial killer thriller called 10, and she asked if she could read some of it. And I had to think about that for a minute, but we were really good friends, and I said, yeah, okay, that's not a problem. Her husband Chris now enters from stage left. Next time we're at Kate and Chris's house, she told me that she'd enjoyed what she'd read of 10, and she said to me, you do know what Chris does, right? And just to slightly backtrack on the story, I've been friends with Kate for several years. We did ski seasons and knew each other really well from then. And Chris, we didn't know quite so well. She'd married Chris, and then they'd moved to a mile down the road from us, and they had no friends or family in that area. So we used to catch up with them a lot. And so I talked with Chris a bit, and I knew a bit about him, and I knew he worked in IT. So I said, yeah, he's in IT. And he didn't really like talking about it. And she said, yes, but he's in IT at HarperCollins. And it took me a few seconds to process that. And I go, you mean HarperCollins, the publisher? And she goes, yes. And then she says, and this is one of the kickers, if you prepare a manuscript sample, and you know the drill for that, outline, synopsis, 10,000 words or so, cover letters, all that kind of stuff, he can put it on the right person's desk, and she will definitely read it because she owes him so many favours from fixing IT shit. And Kate said, and Chris reaffirmed this, the novel will have to stand on its own 2 feet. All I can do is get it in the right person's desk, in her in tray, and she will read it quickly. And I'm like, wow, okay. So of course I said yes. Now, you know that the novel got rejected because it's the title of the video. Here's where my big mistake comes, and hopefully you'll never do something like this. So what happens was I get the rejection, I open it up. It was a handwritten rejection, which is always a positive sign. And the first words I saw at the bottom of it was like what they call a form rejection with space for writing if the person wants to write it. And she'd written some words, and the words were, I think she put, I really like this. I've got this piece of paper somewhere in the cellar, and I must dig it out and take some photos of it and stuff. So she said something like, I really like this, but this is a competitive market and it would need some development of the characters to make this novel stand out. Well, that's all I was going to read, because I had a ruinous artistic tantrum. My ego was totally butthurt, and I just threw the pile of pages on the floor. And 20 minutes later, my wife carefully picked them up, ordered them, put them back in the envelope, and then that envelope was stored away while I went off in a huff. About 18 months later, so fast forward 18 months, I was moving out of the spare bedroom office because another child was on the way and needed his own bedroom, and I had built for me a office at the bottom of the garden that looked like a garden shed, and that was where I was going to do all my music teaching and my writing. And I came across this envelope in the stuff that I was moving out of the spare bedroom office and down to the garden shed office. And I opened it up and I read the rejection again. And I found out there was more handwritten notes on the back of the rejection letter that I'd never even got round to reading. And that's when I realised I am an utter prick. And I'm quite happy to put my hand up and say, yes, I was a total and utter prick. And my language should go a lot worse than that, but I'm trying to keep it reasonably non-sweary. So I turned over the rejection letter, and there was further writing on the back. And what was written, and I'm paraphrasing because it was longer than this, was, here are the names of 3 agents and their phone numbers. I suggest you contact them and see if you can work on developing this story and advancing it towards publication. And I saw that and I went, oops. Because had I seen that at the time, I could have been disappointed about the rejection and then maybe done something about it. And so maybe in one alternate reality, there's a version of me who called those numbers, got one of the guys to help developing the book. I think it was 2 guys and a lady. So one of them to help me develop the book, and got a publishing deal. And maybe I've been publishing in that alternate reality 1 novel a year ever since. So yes, just to reiterate, I was a complete and utter prick. And it's one of the things that I sometimes think about and think, if I could go back, if you're like you had the genie in the magic lamp with 3 wishes, maybe one of my wishes would be, please take me back to this and tell me what would happen if I'd read this correctly. Anyway, can't turn back time, so we've got to move forward. And various things, especially children, and especially I was running 2 businesses at one time, which, as you can imagine, were very draining on and very demanding on time. Sidetracked my writing dreams, and they've been on the shelf for 20 years. But they've never left or gone anywhere. They've always been there, and whenever I've read, and I read a lot in the winters, and I have 2 primary reactions when I read. I read something and go, I could do better than that. And I try and find books like this. I read something where they're so good that I forget that I want to be a writer, and I just read them as a reader and enjoy them. And I try and read as many of those books as I can. But part of the reason for setting up this YouTube channel and setting up the Writing Vault is to get me writing again, and that's working. Yesterday, I finished the first draft of a Ray Bradbury style fantasy-ish story called The Lighthouse at the Start of the World. So I'm really pleased about that. So that side of things are starting to move again. And one day I might dust the old story off and see what I can do with it. But for the next year, I plan to write more short stories, then transition to novellas, then some longer form content in serialized form, before tackling novels. And all of this journey is going to be documented in the resource I'm putting together called the Writing Vault. So at some stage in the next week, when I've done a couple of revision passes on that story I mentioned in the previous slide, I'm going to post the story in the Writing Vault. Plus, I'm going to post all the notes I've got on how the story was created, and maybe some of the text from the first drafts, and show how I've approached revising, so that people who are in the Writing Vault, and it is a paid membership, but it's very cheap, can have a look, and hopefully they can learn from it And hopefully what I really hope is they read it and go, do you know what? I can do better than that. And it helps them get inspiration to start writing. So if you are a frustrated or aspiring fiction writer, then don't hesitate to click the URL that's in the description below this video on YouTube, and go and check that out. If you've got any questions or queries on that, I am Paul at deliberate-practice.com. Drop me an email. I love hearing from people, especially love hearing questions where you're getting stuck. I really like to try and help people if I can, and try and be the mentor to other people, even if only in a couple of emails that I never had. So don't hesitate to drop me an email. And I hope you enjoyed that little anecdotal story. A friend of mine I met on Friday, and I told him the story, and he said, you should definitely make a video about that. And I was like, but I'd be really embarrassed. He said, no, it's a cool story, and it will help humanize you amongst all the other straight teaching videos. So I took his advice and I've done it. I hope you enjoyed it. I hope you've learned my letter. And if you get a rejection letter, A, you make sure you read it from top to bottom 2 or 3 times before you do anything. But B, the other thing to note is a rejection letter is just one person's opinion. So it may have been that I contacted one of the names on this list, sent him or her the stuff, and they loved it and said, no, it needs only a tiny amount of work and we're good to go. Who knows? We'll never know how that might have played out. But if someone rejects you, they may reject you not because your writing's not good enough, but because they just bought 5 stories just like that. So there are always potentially multiple reasons why you might be rejected, and they're not always to do with the quality of what you've submitted. So you've got to learn not to take rejection personally. Maybe I'll do a video on Stephen King's Nail in the Wall, where he used to put all his rejection slips, a few stories he's talked about, or a few of his video interviews he's talked about that. But you've got to learn to approach rejection. It's just part of the process, and now I'm older and wiser. If it happened now, my reaction, I hope, would be a lot different. Anyway, I will close out now, and I'll catch you in the next video, and thank you for watching.